The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this, what is it, February 26th. It's a Monday. Hope everybody's having a great beginning of their week. And yeah, look forward to this week. This will be the last week for a while for regular shows because then I'm traveling to Europe and so on. Let's see. Yeah, we've got a full agenda today. Tons of stuff to cover. So we'll jump right into it. Let me just address this question by Remo. Well, part of the question. On January 31st, I sent you a question by email. Remo, I think I answered the question on Saturday's show. I think it was Saturday. So if you can check and let me know, confirm whether that was the question or wasn't the question. And if it wasn't, then resend it to me. But I do think I answered it on Saturday. All right. I'll get to Tchaikovsky later. All right, let's see. Yes, let's jump right in. I mean, what the hell? Gemini. I don't know how you pronounce it. Gemini? Gemini is Google's AI, the competitor for ChatGPT. It also it has been it was a rebranding and a new version that was released I think last week. Gemini. Okay, Gemini. All right, Gemini also released a new version. They replaced Bard. If you remember, they had it was called Bard, and as part of the new version, they included a image generator. There was an image generator as part of this, and this created a huge furor because people started searching stuff on the image generator in particular. And the image generator kind of seemed to refuse to produce images of like white people. So, for example, you asked the image generator to portray Nazis, and they had a multi-ethnic presentation of Nazis. Blonde, blue-eye, white was not one of the presentations. They asked, I think, about Vikings, and again, there were black Vikings and Asian Vikings and all kinds of Vikings, and so it had somewhere in its code, it had this always make sure that when presenting images of human beings, there is diversity, and it's an idiot, right? Because it is ultimately AI, so it's stupid. It took that literally. So when presenting Nazis, we have diversity. When we present Vikings, we have diversity. And so everywhere it presented diversity, and it became, and it was like almost impossible to get it to actually generate an image of a white person. White's a majority, and it was told to generate diverse, and white is not part. Anyway, pretty ludicrous, stupid, ridiculous, and of course this brought out, everybody accusing Google of woke and everything, and it's true, they are. I mean, that is an actual reality. That if you, people who work at big tech, people who work inside big tech, we've talked about this, hold philosophical, ideological positions that tend to be quite far to the left. That is the reality. Why? Because they go to universities. Why? Because the left seems to dominate smart people, in particular, programmers, or in particular people who've been successful as programmers. I don't know what the answer to that is, but if you survey Silicon Valley, a vast majority of the people there are left, and some of them are wacky left, wacky crazy left, right? It's something I think that if you're convinced that the left is wrong and the right is right, and I did a whole show about how left and right in a sense, useless concept because they don't actually reflect a spectrum. But if you hold that somehow, then the right has a lot of explaining to do. Why doesn't the right attract smart people, educated people, people who have important positions in important companies? What is so deficient about the right that it is unattractive to people like that? And I know the answer to that. I think many of you know the answer to that. But that's an important thing that I think the right needs to grapple with, right? It needs to grapple with. Anyway, so Gemini is kind of, the image generator was obviously nuts. So they withdrew the image generator and they've left the Gemini, chat thing, the AI chat, where you can ask it questions and stuff. And a lot of, I've seen a lot of commentary about how it is unbelievably biased. And, but it's hard for me to tell. And it's generally hard to tell when you see these things on Twitter or elsewhere. Is it real? Is it genuine? Because you could replicate the search. Problem with all these AI tools is every time you ask it a question, it gives you a different answer. They might be consistent answers, but they're different. So it's hard to replicate what people are posting, and it's not clear that what they're posting is real. So I'm hesitant. But is there any question that Gemini is biased to the left? No, it's leftist biased. The people managing the project tend to be on the left. They have put in rules and guidelines that generally generate more leftist-leaning answers. But I ran my own test, right? So I figured I'll run a test. I mean, here's one example, right? India got upset. India's called in Google managers because it's very upset because when in an article describing Modi, the Prime Minister of India, one of the answers had, quote, that Modi was, quote, accused of implementing policies some experts have characterized as fascist. Now, I think that's pretty factual. Some experts have characterized it as being fascist, and certainly, Modi's pretty much a statist, and the elements of what he's doing that are fascist. But the Indian government flipped out. It's, this is leftist propaganda. Stop it. Anyway, I ran a test. So I asked it just a few simple questions on stuff that I actually know. Who is Yaron Brook? It did a pretty good answer. But then at the end, it says something that I don't think is non-objective. It says it's important to note that Brook's views on various topics, particularly economics and politics, can be controversial and generate strong reactions. Yeah. It's recommended to explore his work and engage with diverse perspectives to form your own informed opinions. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Then I asked it, what are Yaron Brook's most controversial views? Well, it picked laissez-faire capitalism, income inequality, objectivism, and views on social issues, including same-sex marriage and abortion, which, those are controversial to the right, not to the left. So that was pretty cool. I mean, and that doesn't show bias. And again, it's crucial to remember that these are just a few examples, and specific aspects of Brook's views considered controversial will depend on individual preferences and ideological leanings. It's also important to note that Brook himself might not necessarily agree with the characterization of his views as controversial. He likely sees them as well-reasoned and logical positions based on his underlying philosophy and economic beliefs. For a more nuanced understanding, it's recommended to explore Brook's works directly, engage with diverse perspectives, and form your own informed opinions on the topic he addresses. I'd say not bad, not bad. Then I asked her, what are Yaron Brook's views on war? And again, I think, wow, it did a good job. War of self-defense. Brook believes that nations have the moral right to engage in wars only in self-defense. That is when their existence or way of life is directly threatened. This means preemptive strikes are not typically justified unless there's undeniable evidence of an imminent attack. That's interesting. I'm not sure where she took that, but or he or whatever. the importance of clarity. Brooks emphasizes the need for clear, well-defined war aims and a rational strategy. Wars cannot be fought for vague motivations or unclear objectives. Pretty good. Individualism within the context of war. Brooke argues that war should be waged to defend individualism, meaning the rights and freedoms of individual citizens against aggression. He opposes wars fought to impose collective ideologies or to pursue abstract principles not directly related to the defense of the nation. Pretty good. Anti-imperialism. Expanding on his belief in individual liberty, Brooke is strongly opposed to interventionist wars and attempt to impose democracy, a particular way of life on other nations. He believes that a country should only fight militarily if its own existence or freedom is at stake. I mean, these are pretty good answers. Now, I asked the same thing on my laptop earlier, and I got different answers. So again, every time you ask it, it gets a little different, but they're not that bad. And at the end, it says important notes. Yaron Brooks' views are based on a philosophical system, objectivism, that may not align with everybody's worldview. It's essential to consider the criticism and complexity surrounding his statements, particularly regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find further information in Yaron's views on war by listening to his podcasts, visiting the Ayn Rand Institute website, or reading his articles. I mean, I don't know how you get much fairer than that. I mean, most people I would ask who know a little bit about me would probably give a worse answer than that. I asked who is Ayn Rand, a pretty good answer. And at the end of this answer, it says, legacy. Despite the controversy, Ayn Rand's works continue to be widely read and debated. Her novels have sold millions of copies, and the Ayn Rand Institute, dedicated to promoting objectivism, is active in advocating for her ideas. However, it's important to be aware that the criticisms surrounding her work and form your own informed opinion based on different perspectives. All right, let's see. Was there anything? I mean, when you ask about anti-Semitism, it gives pretty vague. It doesn't want to really blame the left for too much anti-Semitism, although it does say, and at the end it says, don't conflate criticizing Israel with anti-Semitism. It wants to make sure that's the right. When I asked what is woke, it gave a pretty good answer for what is woke, right? I don't think it was particularly biased in terms of what is woke. Yeah, I mean, a right-wing AI would give a different interpretation, but it wasn't horrible. Same with what is social justice. It's definitely slanted, and you don't get at the end, think for yourself, investigate different opinions about these things. You don't get that for woke, and you don't get that for social justice. You get it for Yaron Brooke, but not for that. I asked her what the social justice view of Israel is, and it gave, at the end it says, it's essential to remember that Israel-Palestinian conflict is exceedingly complex, with valid concerns and perspective on both sides. If you seek a comprehensive understanding, it's necessary to explore various views and be mindful of the sensitivity surrounding this topic. And you could go on and on and on. So I'm sure it gives horrible answers on some questions, and you can probably search long enough and get something really, really horrible. But most of the questions I've asked, and the same thing is true of ChatGPT, I got reasonable answers to, not the answers maybe I would give, but I don't expect that. I think interesting, and these are amazing tools. If it's systematically biased in subtle ways, which I think it probably is, you got to be aware of that, and you got to think about that, and you got to be, just like when you listen to the news or you read a newspaper, do anything like that, you've got to be aware of the fact that any source of information you get has some bias or is likely to have bias, and usually of the left-leaning kind if it's in the media. The same thing is true of AI, and you got to take that into account, and you got to adjust for it. The challenge is, of course, for people who can't do that or don't know how to do that, and I don't know how you fix that. Everything, it's very hard, short of objectivism and being objective, for people not to have a real bias around these things. And I don't know how you fix it. I don't know that there is an easy way or a way in the culture we live in today to fix it, other than for you as consumers of information to be hyper vigilant about. Elon's AI is going to be just as biased as any of these other AI. No less biased than Fox was, non-biased. Elon's not objective. Neither is any media source that I know of. But Elon Musk is super non-objective and super inclined to being flippant and flippancy, which is not objective. So, no, I don't think Elon is going to solve this problem. I don't think anybody today is going to solve this problem. I think it's a problem one has to compute into whatever use you're making of AI. You've got to take this into account. Okay, I've talked about this for too long. Let's jump in. What's the next topic? Yeah, Milei at CPAC. God. All right, so Milei gave an hour long talk at CPAC. CPAC is the Conservative Political Action Committee. It's been around for a long time. It's once a year it has a conference in Washington D.C., but they also have conferences. I think they've had conferences in Australia recently. They've had a conference in Hungary. It's where it used to be the place for conservatives. It's become basically it's been taken over by MAGA. It's been taken over by people supportive of Donald Trump. Conservatives of old school are no longer invited to CPAC. Anyway, Milei gave a talk there. It was an hour long, although it was simultaneous translations. Well, so he said a sentence, and then it was a translation. So it was really a half-hour talk with half hour of translation. Much of it was pretty good, but some of it was awful. Awful. Not even bad, just horrible. His attempt to defend capitalism this time was much more collectivist. It's as if he understood his audience. All right, this is a CPAC audience. They're all a bunch of collectivists. I can't really go after them too much. I can do it in subtle ways, but not too explicitly. So he attacked regulations, and he had an opportunity to attack tariffs. He didn't. He attacked regulations. He came out for free trade, but he positioned it all versus socialism. Every time he said the word socialism, there was vast applause. The audience went nuts. In his talk at the World Economic Forum, he didn't just say socialism. He mentioned statism more broadly, and he gave examples of that. So that was a lot better than It was a far superior talk generally, but it was. He got into a little bit of the technicalities of market failure and all of that. I think the audience was pretty bored by it. You could tell by the low energy. He said socialism, and then everybody cheered, and everybody got upset. Right, they cheered his attacking socialism. But he basically gave a collectivistic defense of capitalism, very collectivistic, much more collectivistic than much more collectivistic than he did at the World Economic Forum. So that was super disappointing. But then, oh my God, he went into this long thing on abortion. It's CPAC, I guess. So he wanted to suck up the audience, but I think even he lost them. He was terrible. He was just awful. It wasn't just that he came out against abortion. It's that he claimed that all of us, at least me, I don't know about you, who are supporters of abortion, are motivated by the desire to see fewer people on the planet. We're guided by the environmentalist Club of Rome, I don't know, Bill Gates maybe, conspiracy theory to reduce the population of the planet. And that's what motivates our pro-abortion stance. And then, no, more people are good. Yeah, I agree with that, but you want to impose that. It was beyond horrible. It was so disappointing. So disappointing. So no, Mary Aline, we're not inviting him to Ocon. She's just, there's just too much collectivism there and too much of this anti-abortion, which I don't know where it comes from, because he's not religious, not particularly religious. I don't know if he's converted to Judaism, on the way to converting to Judaism. I don't know how religious he is on the Jewish side. I don't know any of this. But it was very, very, his talk was very disappointing, both in his collectivistic defense of capitalism, where we know, where at least he's given hints that he knows better, and his whole issue of abortion was just, horrible. So Scott can have Milei, the anti-abortionist. He can have him wholeheartedly. And Ayn Rand from her grave can condemn Scott for all eternity for that. Because we all know Ayn Rand's position on abortion was not exactly Milei's. All right. Sweden, we've discussed this a lot, so this will be a quick one. Sweden has been trying to get into NATO for a while now. First, the Turks didn't want it. Then the Hungarians said, oh, well, we don't know. And of course, so Sweden has been delayed, even though Finland is already part of NATO. Sweden finally sees the end of that process. Hungary has approved Sweden as a member of NATO. Sweden will be joining NATO any day now. It is a done deal. NATO is gaining a military powerhouse, a military force that is among the best trained in the world, a military production capabilities in terms of producing weapon systems that are some of the best in the world. They're also gaining a very, very anti-Russian ally, and another member of the alliance that basically now has the Russians completely penned in when it comes to the Baltic Sea. So if you look at a map, the Baltic Sea, Russia has one port on that sea, a tiny little fragment of land, which is separated from the rest of Russia in between Lithuania and Poland. It has this one little piece of land with a port there. And then to exit the Baltic Sea, they would have to go through this very, very narrow passage between two NATO members, Sweden and Denmark. Basically, this would make the Russian fleet in the Baltic Sea completely ineffective if there was ever a war. It would be easy to completely destroy that fleet and to destroy that port. Russia would know, Sweden is no longer neutral. It would participate. And as I said at the beginning of the war, or as I said when it was first mentioned that Sweden and Finland would join NATO, this is such a strategic defeat for Putin. This is such a strategic defeat for the Russians that it doesn't matter what happens in Ukraine. Basically, they've lost the war. Because this would have not happened if Putin had not invaded Ukraine. And Sweden and Finland are 1,000 times more important in terms of NATO allies than Ukraine is in terms of challenging the Russians. I mean, this basically puts Russia in an almost impossible strategic position. All right. Let's see. Yeah, so Sweden, member of NATO. That's pretty cool. Basically, all of Europe now, with the exception of some of the Balkans, not the Baltics, the Balkans, are now members of Europe. And Switzerland is not. So Switzerland's the only major country that is not a member of Europe now, not a member of NATO now in Europe. So the alliance is about as strong as it can ever be. And Putin can thank himself for that. Ukraine, a lot of issues around Ukraine going on. Zelensky announced that, I think yesterday, that from the beginning of the war, about 31,000 Ukrainians, soldiers, have been killed during the war, which is horrific. 31,000 people, that is a huge number. It is probably about a third of the number of Russians that have been killed in this war. And about a third of what the Russians have lost. They've lost anywhere between probably 70 to 120,000 troops killed. We're not talking about injured. Since the beginning of the war. So, think about 150, maybe 120 to 150 young people dead because of Putin's megalomania. Yes, please timestamp my saying Russia is lost because of this strategic move. Absolutely timestamp that, and I've said it over and over and over again for now 2 years. So feel free to timestamp all those occurrences, and I'm sure 5 years from now, I'll stand by it. And I think by then, anybody who understands anything militarily and strategically will see that that is indeed the case. The importance of Sweden and Finland to NATO far exceeds any significance Ukraine has. Let's see. Other stuff going on in Ukraine. Russia is making slow progress, very slow progress, particularly in the east, particularly in the Donetsk province, and is capturing small towns, but it's very slow, and it's costing them massive numbers of people. It is, but Ukraine, I think. Ukraine is suffering from a massive shortage of ammunition, and a shortage of ammunition that really to resolve is going to need the United States passing an aid bill for Ukraine. I don't know, because politics is always more complicated than I expect it to be. I expect Congress will pass such a support bill. I think if it's brought to the House floor, it will pass by a massive majority, and a significant number of Republicans will vote for it. The question is, can they get House Speaker to bring it to the floor? There is an option that the Democrats are testing, which is basically to go around the Speaker and bring it to the floor in spite of his objection. For that, they would need a number of Republicans to vote to engage in that, to basically engage in that process, which is costly for Republicans. But there's some signs that they could get the votes from Republicans to bypass the Speaker. I think because of that, the Speaker might decide to bring it to the floor anyway, or to find some kind of compromise bill. I do expect that by the end of March, the U.S. will approve somewhere between $50 to $60 billion of aid to Ukraine. That's my expectation. We'll see. Who knows? But that would be my expectations. The other thing, we'll get to that probably tomorrow, about government shutdown. Government could be shut down, so that would make a lot of stuff irrelevant. Let's see, what else? What else are the stories about Ukraine? I think that's it. You are seeing M1 Abrams tanks finally being deployed in Ukraine. I think that's going to make a big difference. You are seeing F-16s deployed in Ukraine. We'll see F-16s deployed in Ukraine probably within a couple of months. That'll make a big difference. I still think that if Ukraine gets the support, i.e. the weapon systems that it needs, Ukraine can still do a lot of damage and kick out the Russians from occupied Ukraine. All right, let's see what else. I think that's what I want to say about Ukraine. Social media, and SCOTUS. Today, arguments are being made at the Supreme Court about basically two laws, a Florida law and a Texas law, that aim to regulate social media, that aim to regulate the use of social media, to aim to regulate speech on social media in favor of Republicans. And so the laws would ban social media from being able to exclude conservative speech. They would ban, for example, companies from, deplatforming a politician of either party. So if you're a politician, you get, social media doesn't have any rights with regard to you. You get to be, you cannot be deplatformed. And a number of other issues that limit the ability of social media, restrict the ability of social media to basically make decisions about what should be on social media and what should not. Interestingly enough, the laws do not apply to conservative social media platforms like Paula Gabe and Truth Social as they are drafted today, which I think the Supreme Court might also take into account. 2 trade groups have sued over this. Trade groups affiliated with social media companies. In the case of the Florida law, a federal court ruled the law unconstitutional and said, and basically put a halt to it. The Circuit Court of Appeals reaffirmed what the lower judge decided. So the law is frozen for now, not in place for now. In Texas, the opposite happened. I think our lower court affirmed it, and then it was overruled by the Fifth Circuit, which disagreed. So, in the case of Texas, a federal judge in Austin put the state's law on hold, and then the Court of Appeals disagreed, and then that's why it's now in front of the Supreme Court. So this has been. We've talked about these laws in the past when they were first passed. It's been around for a while now. States are claiming this isn't a free speech issue. This is a business regulation issue. Of course, the social media companies are claiming this is all about free speech, and the state has no rights when it comes to this. For example, the states are saying, look, the Supreme Court has held that a shopping mall must allow high school students to solicit signatures for a political petition because a shopping mall is, quote, public, a public square, and so are these media companies. I think you know where I stand on a shopping mall. A shopping mall should not allow high school students to solicit. It should choose which high school students to allow to solicit and which high school students not to allow to solicit. Mall owners have the right to free speech, which includes the right which speech to endorse, which speech to sanction, and which speech not to endorse and sanction. So I disagree with the Supreme Court on any use of private property as if it's some kind of public square. It's not. So in this case, I'm unequivocally against both Texas and Florida. I very much hope that the Supreme Court takes a stand that is pro-free speech, which means leaving the social media to make their own rules and to decide for themselves. They are private companies, they are private property. They get to decide what rules, who can and cannot speak on what issues on their property. And we as consumers can decide whether to use them or not. Now, there's another case going through the courts that is accusing the Biden administration of suppressing free speech by putting pressure on social media. And in that case, the Supreme Court should vote against the Biden administration because clearly the Biden administration, as have previous administrations, but the Biden administration is by far the most egregious, Biden administration should not have any influence on social media in terms of what they do and do not report. That clearly is a violation of free speech. But for the court to decide that social media needs to play by rules dictated by state government authorities is a massive violation of the freedom of speech of the social media companies. So I reject that completely. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the how the court rules on all this stuff. And I think it's going to be an indication about freedom, because this would be a massive loss of free speech if the government decides to regulate the speech on social media. It'd be a massive loss of free speech, and free speech is at the core of our liberty, at the core of our freedom. And for those of you who think that the state of Florida and the state of Texas should be able to regulate speech on social media, shame on you. You are no friends of liberty. You're no friends of freedom. You're no friends of speech at all. Finally, good news. I think hard to interpret this only in one sense. Supposedly there was a big poll in Iran. I don't understand if there was this big poll, supposedly done by the government. I don't understand these results and why they were released and who's releasing them. Now, this is from the Telegraph. It's a newspaper in the UK. Other people are reporting it. Other places are reporting it. But it's really hard to comprehend why the Iranians would publicize this unless, and the articles don't say, unless this is not a public poll, a poll that was publicized, but somehow they got the info. The reporter is in Dubai. I don't know. But this sounds too good to be true, but maybe it is true. Here's the story. Almost 3/4 of Iranians want a secular government instead of a theocratic dictatorship. The survey also revealed that, and I'm reading from the news article, that less than 1 in 10 people think women should be forced to wear hijab. Less than 10%. That's stunning. All of this is a massive shift since the Go Revolution, since 2022 Women, Life, Freedom uprising. So since that uprising, there's been this massive shift towards secular government and the government getting out of, the whole idea of hijab. From 31% wanting a secular government to 73% wanting a secular government. I mean, that's astounding. And it would confirm what we heard on the show when I interviewed Puya. When I interviewed Puya, who's escaped Iran, right? And he has communication with his Iranian relatives. And he was saying, no, this women's revolution is a moral revolution. This is a shift in the way Iranians are thinking. And this confirms it, if it's true. Only 7.9% of the respondents said they agree women must be made to wear the hijab, which is down from 18.6. Again, these are huge. The number of those actively objecting to the imposition of mandatory hijab increased from 15.7 to 34.4, while 38% said they are not against people who break the hijab laws, up from 10.6%. And again, all of this is because of the revolution, because of the protests and all of that. 85% of those surveys said Iranians have become less religious compared to 5 years ago, with only 7% claiming to have become more religious. A further 81% anticipated a continued decline in religious observance over the next 5 years, with support for mandatory hijab seeing a sharp decline. And this is, by the way, in the middle of massive crackdown on civil and religious liberties within the country, a dramatic increase in the number of people executed. At least 834 people were executed in Iran last year. I don't know if this is true. It's some of the best news I've heard in a long time. This is fantastic. So, and it shows the power of these images, the power of these women, the power of the arguments they made, and the power of the courage of a minority, the courage of people going out there, taking off the hijab and just walking in the street, and the protest and all of that. It is true It is amazing, and how courageous these girls and women have been. You know, I talked about it. I gave a talk about it at the University of Texas, and to see a poll like this suggests that they had an impact, and that is heartwarming and inspiring. All right. That is the news on this February 26th. I'm going to now turn to the Super Chat. So I will remind you that this is a listener-supported show. It exists because of support from listeners like you. You know, those of you who do support the show, whether on a monthly basis through Patreon or YaronBrookShow.com/membership, or those of you who use the Super Chat or the stickers or members on YouTube, or whatever way some of you give me money through Venmo and PayPal, all kinds of ways to support the show. I really, really appreciate it. You guys make this show possible. You make it possible for many people to listen who are not paying. But thank you for you guys who do support it. Okay. Let me see. Anything else we want to cover? No, we'll call that. We'll talk about some other things tomorrow. But for now, I think we're good. Again, let's just talk about it tomorrow. All right. Remo, what are your favorite works by Tchaikovsky? I mean, my favorite works of Tchaikovsky are the first piano concerto and the second piano concerto, the violin concerto, Symphony number 4, 5, and 6, 4 being my favorite of the 3. Even, what else? I'd say those are by far my favorites. So the violin concertos and the piano concertos, particularly, again, 1 and 2. I think he has 3. What else? Symphonies I've said. Oh, yes, of course. The piano trio. God, one of my all-time favorite compositions of anybody in the whole world of classical music. The piano trio. I like the Nutcracker. I like Swan Lake. They're very much tied to the ballet. The music is obviously beautiful, but to really inspire, I'd say those others, the violin and piano concerto, and then the trio. His chamber music is beautiful. So all of those are my favorites. All right, let me go to the $50 ones. We got a couple of $50. Dave Dean, thank you, Dave. Not presenting a misbegotten notion to play devil's advocate today. Not presenting a misbegotten notion to play devil's advocate today to inspire discussion. Okay. I cognitive dissonance a little bit. All right. I appreciate your consistently reasoned presentations, especially on individual rights. Hope your selfishly individualistic day is going swimmingly. Thank you, Dave. That is incredibly generous of you. $50. That is fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, feel free to ask any misbegotten notion while playing devil's advocate. At your, I'm available to answer those misbegotten whatever, whenever you want. All right, Ryan, also $50, but Canadian, so a little less. Canadian dollar, not doing so well. In the Fountainhead, there are scathing reviews of Roark's work written by second-handed experts. Criticism for the new intellectual on release were eerily similar. Do you see any parallel Milei's reception by the media and Western culture today? No, because most of the criticism of Milei is not even that intellectual. Most of the criticism of Milei I see are like, oh, well, he's just another Donald Trump or another Bolsonaro, which is an insult because I think he's much better than both of those in spite of the things he's really bad on. He's much better than both of those. I don't see that. I don't think Milei is, I don't think you can compare Milei to Howard Roark or to Ayn Rand. I mean, he's good as a politician goes, and some stuff he's very good on, and some stuff he's awful on, as I said. But it's not. I don't think it's. I really don't think it rises to that level of criticism, and the criticisms are pretty standard. These neoliberal policies, they don't work. They're just going to increase the number of poor people in Argentina, and they're going to increase inequality, and the rich will benefit. And I mean, they're the same old boring things. But you see, they're afraid to over-criticize Milei for two reasons. One is the situation in Argentina when he got elected was truly brutal, and they all know it. So something had to give. And second, what if he succeeds? And he might. And they want to hedge their bets. So I don't think they rise to the same level. And I don't, again, but partially is I don't think Milei rises to that level. And the criticisms don't either. So again, I was enthusiastic about Milei, but it's tempered, and it should be, because the real problems. I mean, even in his World Economic Forum speech, I mean, his defense of capitalism at the end of the day was collectivistic. It wasn't individualistic. He hinted at the potential of being individualistic, but he never laid that out. And then even there, he threw out this gratuitous comment about abortion. And at CPAC, he went all out on the abortion stuff, which is absurd and ridiculous, quite stupid, I think. Quite stupid for a man who's obviously not stupid, which is sad. It's sad. I still hope I meet him in Argentina. But, if I do meet him in Argentina, I'm going to tell him what I think about his abortion stand, which is ridiculous. Hopper Campbell says, look how popular Milei is becoming all around the world. We are foolish to think free market radicals can't win. People are seeking honesty and passion. Yeah, popular around the world? Where's he popular? I'm not convinced. I mean, I don't see it. Again, he was in front of the CPAC audience, right? It didn't seem like there was a small group of people that were super passionate. The only time he got any applause lines was when he went after socialists. But anybody could have done that. His positive agenda about liberating business, about anti-regulation, about eliminating trade barriers, not a peep from the audience. No support. So what do they like about Milei? They like about Milei what Scott likes about Milei. The only thing Scott emphasizes about Milei is he's anti-left. He doesn't like the socialists. But that's not a pro-free market ideology. There's no pro-free market elements. And the reality is, if you look at pro-free markets, Nikki Haley is much more pro-free markets than Donald Trump is, and she just lost in her hometown. So all these people care about is that he's anti-left. It's not what he's pro. And what he's pro is the only thing that matters in the end. Long term, it's the only thing that matters. Michael says, why do Muslim countries have a harder time embracing the Enlightenment than Christian countries? Is Islam a uniquely suicidal death pact? I don't think so. We have to remember historically that Islam had a golden age, and it was golden. Certainly, it was unbelievably golden relative to what Europe was experiencing at the same time. That the golden age of Islam was caused by the same thing that led to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in America. That is the taking seriously of Greek philosophy and Greek approach to human knowledge, and kind of a scientific approach, an empirical approach. Taking seriously Aristotle, if you will. Without that, there is no golden age in Islam, and there's no golden age. The problem is, so there's nothing inherent in Islam that prevents it. But the reason Islam never got to the point of enlightenment is that for whatever reason, and you could argue about what those reasons are, the Mongols or Al-Ghazali, famous Islamic philosopher, or a number of other things, they turned their backs. They turned their backs on reason and on Aristotle. Sometime in the late 12th century, at least in the Middle East, and ultimately in Spain, they lost to the Christians. So they never got to develop those ideas further in Spain, which was experiencing, again, part of this golden age of Islam. So I don't think it's inherent. I do think historically it faded, it was destroyed, and since then, there has not been a revival. And when it was revived, right, when it was revived, it tried to be revived in the late 19th century, the only alternative, secular alternative was presented to their Muslim religion was fascism and socialism, and that failed. So they became even more committed to their Islamic views, because whenever they tried secularism, it failed. It blew up in their face. So no, there's nothing inherent in it. It's more an issue of the particular history that evolved. The fact that, you know, maybe the Ottomans didn't think they needed an enlightenment because they were so much better than the Christian West until the late 17th century. And then by the time they figured out, no, the West has overtaken them and they better learn something from the West, it was too late for them. But I'd say it's the abandonment of Aristotle just at about the same time that the West was re-embracing Aristotle. So the West went in one direction and the Islamic world went in a different direction. Hopper Campbell. How can we be so materially rich while simultaneously being spiritually poor? I mean, it's a good question, but we can be. People are incredibly good at compartmentalizing. How many entrepreneurs and scientists and innovators do we know that are excellent at what they do at work and then are stupid when it comes to how they live their lives, the values that they pursue in their personal lives, and the politics that they embrace? How many of them feel empty? How often do you meet wealthy, successful, materially successful people who feel empty inside and you know, don't know what to do with themselves and have not achieved happiness in spite of their material success? I mean, you see the spiritual poverty that our world is filled with, and yet people can be compartmentalized. Now, they can't be forever. At some point, it leaks. And you can see the leak in Google Gemini. You can see a little bit of the leak. So it leaks. It leaks from home, from the bad values they adopt politically or philosophically or intellectually. It leaks into their work. But so generally, yes, I mean, there is no, sadly, there is no escaping the fact that it's people compartmentalized, and the world in which we live today are very compartmentalized, right? Michael says, there's a strong pro-life movement among AnCaps, and I think Milei is getting this crap from. I still have enormous respect for him, and I think he is right that the left promotes abortion for anti-human nihilistic reasons. I don't believe that. I don't think that's true at all in terms of the left. I mean, sure, there's some people who do. Certainly, there are elements in the environmentalist movement and there are elements in the woke, crazy left. But most leftists are not there. Most leftists are center left. They would vote for Biden, but not for AOC. They won't vote for Bernie Sanders. They'll vote for Biden. They'll vote for centrist. And they are pro-abortion for the right reason, because they respect a woman's life. They respect a woman's ability to control her own body and her choices. Now, they're incredibly inconsistent about it. They don't know how to defend it. They have no philosophical terminology to talk about individual rights because they don't know anything about individual rights. But to demonize the entire left is just wrong, fundamentally wrong. And it's, you know, it's just like demonizing the entire right about certain issues. Yeah, I don't believe the entire right is anti-abortion. I think this is why Republicans are losing election after election after election, because they're discovering that there's a significant portion on the right, Republican women, who are actually pro-abortion. Because they're women, because they're a little rational, because they get it. They know the pain and suffering that anti-abortion laws inflict on women. The biggest supporters of, the biggest anti-abortion proponents are all men. I mean, there's some women, but they're men. So, you know, it's wrong. It just is unbelievably wrong. The left is good up to a point on abortion. And yes, there's some freaks, there's some crazies who want it in order to reduce the population. But that is a minority of people on the left. Minority of people on the left. And it serves the purpose of demonizing them so that you can go after everybody who's pro-abortion is just wants to reduce the size of the human race, all a bunch of crazy environmentalists. No, they are not. And to have that view is to increase the likelihood that abortion will disappear. Fenn Harper says, thanks for recommending The Myth of Left and Right. I listened to it on Friday, and I've used the ideas in it a lot since then, including in chat right now. Going to start Closing of the Western Mind after the show is over. Yeah, I mean, you finished that whole book in one sitting? God, you have a lot of time on your hands, Fenn Harper. That's amazing. I'm going to do the book review of Closing of the Western Mind. I think it's an excellent book. I'm now deep into the reopening of the Western mind, which is great. And the more I read about history, the more I read about the history of Greece, and the dominance of Christianity over the Roman Empire into the Middle Ages and towards the Renaissance, the more anti-Christian I become. So Christianity is the ultimate con. It is the ultimate irrational ideology. It is just unbelievable how bad Christianity really, really is. Not in its views, but in its kind of, in the way those views, particularly in Catholicism, have developed and manifest. It's just all about power. And it is the worst of all religious kind of attitudes. It combines all of them. And American Christians are pretty secular, and that's what makes them relatively sane. Christianity as an ideology, first of all, there is no such thing, but to the extent that dogma has been presented, it's just unbelievably horrible. Unbelievably horrible. All right, Michael, is the saying never speak ill of the dead based in altruism? Yeah, probably. It's based on do not judge, right? It's based on the biblical. Now I know it's the biblical. You guys corrected me. Sometimes I acknowledge I'm wrong when I am wrong, and I correct. It's based on the biblical idea of do not judge. Who are you to judge? And they're dead anyway, so why judge? Quite the contrary. You should judge. You should judge them while they're alive. You should judge them when they're dead. The fact that if there's something to be learned from it, if there's something to be gained from it, then yeah, absolutely, you should judge them. Yaron says, how come you never get tired of talking about politics? Interesting question. I don't think of it as politics. I think of it as the application of ideas to what's going on in the world. And it's all interesting. I find ideas interesting. I find it challenging and interesting. And, you know, if everybody, if it was easy or simple or self-evident, then I guess I wouldn't have a following. Nobody would find it interesting. But I think it's interesting. I think I bring something to it, and it engages me. So because I read the news anyway. I'm interested in what's going on in the world, and I've got ideas about them, and I want to. This is a great place to articulate. I can't stop having views on everything in the world out there, and on everything, pretty much anything, as you know, from sex to politics to war to, philosophy, the whole thing. And yeah, why wouldn't I talk about it? I have views. I mean, there's certain things I don't have views on it because I just don't know. Like science, I don't really have strong views about scientific issues, and we don't talk about them a lot because I don't know much about science. I know very little about physics, particularly modern physics. It's bewildering to me, much of it. So I just don't. I don't talk about it. And I know, I talk about scientific. I don't talk about scientific achievements that much. I talk about technological achievements because that kind of is the application I get. James Taylor, was Hayek a better economist than Milton Friedman and Murray Rothbard? Oh, God. I don't know. I don't know. They were all good economists, if you can separate the economics. They were all good economists. The problem with Hayek is he changed his mind about economic issues because of philosophical issues, and he was a bad philosopher, in my view, very bad social thinker and a bad philosopher. He was a good economist, but his economics are often influenced, as you'd expect, by his philosophical and political views or social views. So he was terrible on a central bank until very late, as was Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman philosophically was terrible. Epistemologically was terrible. He has a very, very influential essay on the epistemology of economics, which is awful, which has done a lot of damage to the whole field of economics, the whole field of finance. And then Murray Rothbard, of course, is a good economist. But again, as soon as he deviated from economics, he was awful. And even when he deviates, seemingly doesn't deviate from economics, so he goes into history of economics, he's awful. His history, I wouldn't believe a word you read from Murray Rothbard about history, even when it comes to economic issues. Again, because I read one of his books on the history of banking in the 19th century, and it was fundamentally wrong. And I know banking, so I know it was wrong. And he was lying in order to prove an economic point he had made at some point. So, yeah. All right, this is a question I'm not going to answer. Do you like Stephen Hicks and Craig Biddle? Why would I answer a question like that? I'm sorry, Henry, but it just doesn't make any sense to me why that would be of interest. If you've followed me or if you know of my public statements and appearances, I have a low regard for them in various respects. But I don't like dwelling and delving into that negativity on this show. It's not what the show is for. It is so ironic that the right, this is Neocon, it is so ironic that the right that claims that they fight a tyrannical government with the Second Amendment are the ones screaming that Ukraine should make peace with Russia. Such hypocrites. Absolutely. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable that people who claim to be for freedom and liberty and anti-initiation of force, and people who claim to be pro-self-defense and defending your land and defending your property from invasion, that they would want Ukraine to settle with Russia is just beneath contempt. It just, you got to sell out. You got to compromise. Don't fight. Funding for others. What the hell? What the hell is? I've heard libertarians say this. You'd expect it from libertarians. Say, oh no, the War of Independence, worst war ever. Britain was not that bad. Why would you fight against Britain when it was not that bad? And what did you get instead? You got America with slavery, but it might have abolished slavery earlier. So the War of Independence, a disaster, should have never gone on it. A lot of libertarians believe that. Oh yeah. The anarchist libertarians. You sound surprised, Jennifer. You need to hang out with libertarians more, as I have on various occasions. It's pretty nasty. Chakra, 19. Hi, I'm a 28-year-old Israeli entrepreneur looking for the best place to live. I thought about Austin. Any other recommendations? I'll find a way for a visa, probably an investor easy. Austin is great, absolutely. And actually, if you go to Austin, Chakra, then let me know, and I'll put you in contact with kind of the Israeli entrepreneur network in Austin, Texas. There's a very developed Israeli entrepreneur network. It's a good network to be part of because you'll meet venture capitalists and you'll meet other entrepreneurs, and it'll be a great way to kind of ease you into a new culture and a new place. It's a very thriving, very active entrepreneurial group, meets regularly. They help each other out, but also, again, VCs are engaged and VCs are part of the group. So it's a really good. I also know a guy who's raising money now for Israeli entrepreneurs. So I've got a lot of connections if you choose to go to Austin. Austin, I'd say, is the best place right now. And Silicon Valley is the gold standard. It still is, in spite of everything. There's more money, there's more VCs, there's more entrepreneurs, there's more talent, there's more programmers, there's more of everything. You pay higher taxes. You have to live with the stupidity that's going on in California. But in terms of your ability to be successful as an entrepreneur, there is no better place in the world if you want to maximize the probability of being successful as an entrepreneur than Silicon Valley. It just isn't. So Austin is great. Silicon Valley, in some respects, better. It somewhat depends on, and both places are a great place to live. It somewhat depends on how important for you is that California's got this crazy politicians, and but has great weather, by the way, and Austin doesn't have great weather. So it's a value hierarchy thing. But happy to help once you decide where you're going to get you in touch with people. Ivitki 13, have you heard of Harry Browne's permanent portfolio? If so, what are your thoughts on it, both its conceptual framework and its relative effectiveness? I assume your answer isn't financial advice. It's not, but I don't know what a permanent portfolio is. It sounds really bad, but I don't know what it is. So I'll look it up and see if I can provide you with a better answer. But I just haven't heard of it. Permanent sounds bad. You don't want to be permanent vis-a-vis a portfolio. A portfolio, yeah. All right, let's see. Ryan, adding more weak Canadian dollars so that my total today is 50 US dollars. Thank you. That is incredible. Really appreciate that. It's tough, Yaron. I live in a socialist state and have to pay a carbon tax. Maybe one day I will break free. Absolutely. I hope you do break free. Canadians have many more options than Americans because Canada doesn't tax your worldwide income. So you could, for example, move to Portugal or to anywhere and only pay a local tax. And depending on your profession and depending on all the other things, there are lots of places in the world that have lower taxes than Canada. An American can't do that because an American pays the local tax and then the difference he pays to the IRS. America is brutal when it comes to taxes, much worse than a socialist country like Canada. You can go anywhere. I knew Canadians who went to Bermuda and spent some time in Bermuda and Bermuda had no tax, so they paid no taxes. Americans who went to Bermuda paid taxes to the IRS. So take advantage of the fact that you live in a country that does not tax worldwide income. Anne says, so glad you're on. Thank you, Anne. I really, really appreciate that. I'm glad I'm on too. It's good. Friend Harper says, I get 9 hours of headphone time at my job. That is pretty repetitive. Myth of left and right is only 4.5 hours as an audiobook. Really? Wow. That is pretty, 4.5 hours. That's really short. Okay, closing of the Western Mind is much longer than that. I think it's 24 hours or something like that. I'll have to, cool that it's only 4.5 hours. All right, guys, thank you. Really appreciate the support. Thank you to all the super chatters. You were great today. Really appreciate it. If you're watching the show and are not a subscriber, please subscribe. Please subscribe. Also, if you want to support the show on a monthly basis, yaronbookshow.com/membership and Patreon. I will be doing a show tomorrow. I think a 3 p.m. show for the a 2 p.m. show for the news, and then an evening show, and then on Thursday there'll be another evening show, and that evening show will actually be on IVF. I'll be interviewing a physician, a doctor who will talk about all the latest innovation in terms of artificial insemination and IVF and all of that, and how the anti-abortion laws affecting the industry, and it should be fascinating. So this is a world-class expert, a leader in the field, a professor at Columbia University, and a physician. And we'll be talking about that. That will be on Thursday, 7 p.m. East Coast time. All right, everybody. So if you have any questions about any of that, please come along. It'll be interesting. I'm sure we'll get fewer viewers for that show because you guys like the nitty-gritty of politics, and you like me going after the left and right. And here we'll talk a little bit about anti-right, but we'll talk primarily about something positive, which is the beauty and amazing and stunningness of IVF technology. Thank you, everybody. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.